Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the labor movement during the Gilded Age. As we've learned in the past, there were a lot of sweatshops and child labor factories and really poor working conditions, low pay during this time period. And eventually, what came out of this was this whole movement where people were fighting for better conditions, better pay. They started to unionize, and that's what we're going to focus on with the labor movement right now. So, first of all, let's start off with these poor working conditions. What are some of these examples of the working conditions for these people? They were very poor. Well, a number of things. First of all, they had to work 10 to 12-hour plus days. This is a long time, especially with the kind of jobs that they had. They didn't have sick days. If they were sick, they could lose their job. If their boss was nice enough not to fire them, they just wouldn't at least get paid. And many of these depended on their pay on a daily basis. Their pay was extremely low. When we read Sadie's story, right, we know that. We understand that they were making, for those days, somewhere between $5 and $9 a week if you were an adult, which is roughly averages out to about $200 in today's money. So not a whole lot of money, and it was tough to get by, so they needed everything they could get. It was unsafe. It was unhealthy. These were new machines. It was hot. They were machines that had open gears, open belts, open blades, and very, very unsafe. Unhealthy because people went to work sick because they had to make their money and they didn't want to lose their jobs. Lastly, these were dull, repetitive jobs, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over and over again in a hot, sweaty factory building, having people constantly looking over your shoulder. This is not an ideal place to work. And there were production quotas, right? Meaning that you had to produce a certain amount of shirts, for example, each day before you could go home. If you didn't, you stayed. If you didn't stay, you got fired, you didn't get paid. So these production quotas were high and were extremely tough to meet as well. And I mentioned a little bit about the unsafe machines already, right? They were new machines, and they weren't really regulated for safety. So let's just take a look here at a few of the different pictures from this. This looks like it's probably some sort of a textile mill. You can see all of the different sewing machines here. Sorry about that. You can see women lined up in the background. You can see men here, right? These men were probably the managers looking over to make sure that the women weren't stealing anything, to make sure that they were following the rules, to make sure that they were meeting their quotas. And they'd be walking up and down the aisles pretty much all day long, making sure that they're doing this right. Here you see a number of things why this is so dangerous. One, there are a lot of fires. This is a picture from the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And there weren't fire codes at the time. They didn't have regulations on how to make sure that you were safe in case there was a fire. So a lot of fires did happen in factories during this time period. Plus, you have brand new machines that can easily catch on fire, especially if they're not well maintained, which a lot of them weren't. Child labor. I mean, look at this. You have children stepping up onto machines because they are too small to use it. You have belts right here that could easily catch this boy's tattered clothing. You have gears. You have a lot of things spinning that could grab these boys in. They're working shoeless in this factory. It just does not seem like a safe working environment. Here's another example of a textile mill. You can see how many women there are sitting in the same spot all day long in the same chair, doing the same repetitive task over and over again, once again with these male managers constantly looking over your shoulders. So why were they this way? Why do you think the factories were this way? How does this help the owner? That's kind of the question you have to ask yourself. Well, there's a lot of reasons, right? Their goal, the owner's goal, was to make as much money as possible. So that meant paying their employees as low of wages as they can, getting their products built as fast and quickly as they can, producing as much as they can and as fast as they can in a short amount of time. And lastly, not necessarily paying for anything that's going to make the working conditions more safe and more enjoyable. Right? They're not going to necessarily fix machines all the time or make sure that they're running perfectly. They're not going to care about how hot it gets in there. They're not going to care about if the bosses are nice to the women that are doing the sewing or not, because they want to make money. They want things to be bam, bam, bam. This is how it works. So that's why they did that. How did families end up getting by? Right? They got paid very little. The average weekly wage was $10. Right? So if a woman's working in a textile mill, she got paid about $10 a week. Not a lot. Barely enough to pay for their expenses. Barely enough to pay for their expenses. So because of that, they had to come up with some supplemental income. People have to do that today, right? Sometimes people get second jobs. They work at night. They might have their kids work. And that's exactly what they did here. You see child labor being used. And I'm not talking about just getting a job at McDonald's after school. I'm talking about 40-hour a week, working in factories, getting sweaty, getting dirty, getting injured, getting sick because of the work that they had to do. And most of the time didn't even go to school. Whatever income they made, which was very little, went to the family then to help pay for some of these expenses. If they were sick, out of luck, right? They didn't get paid, they went into debt. So almost always they went to work because of that. Business owners, were they really visible to hear complaints if somebody complained about a machine being broken or somebody not being treated correctly? No, they weren't. They paid men to be their managers. All business owners cared about is that the rules were enforced and that they were making money. If the money was coming in, they let the managers take care of it, and they didn't want to hear complaints, right? They didn't want to hear it. It's their business, their money. As long as they're making money, they're happy. So because of this, you start to get some workers that start to be disgruntled, start to get angry, and they create labor unions, which basically is a bunch of workers getting together to say, hey, this is what we want. If you don't meet our demands, we're gone. Find somebody else. This is what we need to have in order to continue working for you. So early unions, a great example of one that happened is the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. B&O Railroad Company cuts their employees' wages by 10%, right? So if you're making $10 a week, now you're making $9 a week, which every dollar counts when you're making this little amount of money. The workers then refused to work on the trains in West Virginia. Eventually, people from other states start to join in, and you have one of the first real big strikes in the United States, the Railroad Strike of 1887. President Rutherford B. Hayes sends in troops because the government, the country, depends on railroads. They can't run without the railroads. So he sends in troops to get the people back to work. They go back to work, and this strike essentially was a failure because the wages ended up getting cut. But the one thing it does is it sends a message that people are going to start standing up for their rights, especially in the workplace. These strikes also led to racism because as people went on strike, they started to hire scabs that are people that fill in for the striking workers. Chinese people tended to be these scabs. And if they weren't discriminated against enough already, now they're going to be discriminated against big time, mainly because they were taking these jobs, right? If somebody's working those jobs, the people's strike is not going to do a whole lot of good. So this continues. We see a number of different things happen where business and government leaders try to break the union power. They don't want union. They don't want the people to have the power. So in Chicago in 1886, there was something called McCormick Harvester Company. And they went on strike because of the members of this company went on strike because of labor disputes, and they were locked out. Right? They said, nope, you're not coming in here. So the strike, the companies hired strike busters, basically scabs, once again, like the Chinese for the B&O Railroad, to come in and work at cheaper prices. This angered the union big time. And because of this, the police and the union members start to clash, right? They're definitely on different pages as far as what their goal is. During this clash where the union members get locked out and the police come to kind of regulate, one of the union members dies. And because of this, the union leaders said, hey, we're going to call for a meeting at Haymarket Square in Chicago the next day so we can discuss how to react to one of our union members dying by police brutality. So they go here. They publish this in the newspaper, so it's public knowledge. The police show up. A bomb is thrown. Nobody knows if it was the police or if it was the union members, but a bomb was thrown, and the police, because of that, react. The police react and the union members react. And you kind of have a riot break out. 7 police die, 60 people are wounded. So the police start to fire into the crowd, and they kill several more and wound over 100 more labor strikers. This becomes known as the Haymarket Affair. It's one of the biggest labor disputes that there is. Union leaders were arrested and membership decreased because people are like, holy cow, does me being a member of the union mean that I'm going to have to risk my life by getting shot by police officers? A lot of people said it's not worth it. I'd rather make less money. So we see the membership decrease. But this sticks in people's heads, and they'll remember it in the future. Here's an example of the meeting that would have been posted in the newspaper. Haymarket Square on Randolph Street, a mass meeting tonight at 7:30 o'clock. This is kind of an artist's redrawing of what happened at the Haymarket Square. You can see the strikers here. You can see the police officers, the explosion going off, and then a riot ensues. So around this time, something called the American Federation of Labor is created. In 1886, same year as Haymarket, a gentleman named Samuel Gompers is the one who creates this. And basically what the AFL is a national union organization. They kind of take the idea that, hey, we're stronger if we're bigger. If we get multiple people together from multiple industries, we're stronger because we have more people, more power. And they also create new strategies. They start to negotiate. They start to go on strike. They start to boycott products that they think aren't treating their employees fair enough. In 1904, we have about 1.7 million members in the AFL. So it's growing and is growing rapidly around this time period. It's going to play a major role in labor disputes later on. Then we come to probably the most famous strike during the labor movement, the Homestead Strike. The Homestead Strike happened at Carnegie Steel Mills in Homestead, Pennsylvania. And there's a little review on Carnegie, right? How did he make his fortune? His goal was to buy up basically all the different parts, vertical integration, all the different parts of the process to make steel. So buy out the iron mines, buy out the coal mines, buy out the steel companies, buy out the railroad companies. That way he could lower his prices and make as much profit as possible. Part of that also was to have low wages. So there's one point where Carnegie left. He was like on vacation for a while in Europe. And his guy named Frick, Frick was his right-hand man. He was his basically vice president of the company. And he cuts wages. He thinks he's going to impress Carnegie by saying, hey, look, we're going to make money. We're going to lower our costs and make more money. Well, a union organizes and goes on strike. And Carnegie and Frick respond. Basically, they hire new workers. They say, all right, if you're not going to work for us, we're going to hire new people. And we're going to hire this group called the Pinkertons to come and enforce that you are not coming in or disrupting business here at the Homestead Steel Mill. The Pinkertons were known for their brutality, known for not taking anything lightly, and they will fire their guns if they have to do whatever basically they're a hired army that Carnegie and Frick hire. A battle ensued, and 10 people ended up dying. Scabs eventually were escorted by the Pennsylvania militia, and the strike collapses, and the union is busted within 4 months. So once again, not a successful thing, but is going to pave the way later on for more strikes. I don't have a battle or a video for you right now, but in class later, you're going to watch this video, and it does a great job of explaining exactly what was going on in the Homestead Strike. Last one I want to talk to you about is the Pullman Strike. This happened in 1894, which was a depression year. The economy was not doing well. Pullman cars are like fancy cars. They're like railroad cars for the rich. It's like a limousine of the day. And this company, because they're not doing well, needs to cut back, save some money. So they say, we're going to cut your wages by 25%. Instead of making $20 a week, you're going to make $15 a week. Well, that's going to really affect the workers. So they start a strike, and this strike starts to spread through the entire country. And as we know, we depend on the railroad. Without the railroad, there's not a lot we can do. So Pullman refuses to negotiate with the strikers. The American Railway Union president, who's name is Eugene V. Debs, calls on all U.S. railroads to refuse handling of Pullman cars, which basically every train had Pullman cars. So basically what happens is rail traffic across the country completely stops. President Grover Cleveland sends in federal troops because they need the railroad. And once again, the strike ends. This time, interestingly enough, Eugene V. Debs, the president of the American Railway Union, goes to jail for his part in the strike. And this is going to start a lot of backlash. And in many ways, the labor movement is only getting started. So that's the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot. Next, you guys are going to be watching a video from The Men That Built America. And it's an excerpt from Carnegie and the Homestead Strike. So pay attention to that. We'll see you guys later. Have a good one.